The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky here, and today I'm very excited to have Felix Velarde with us. Felix, welcome.
Lovely to be here. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, so you are a keynote speaker, you're an author, you're an adjunct professor, you're also the CEO of 2Y3X program. You're a specialist on fast growth, mergers, acquisitions, strategic mentoring, value proposition development, a whole bunch of other stuff that falls under the umbrella of being kind of a serial entrepreneur, right?
Being old.
That's another way I would say experienced, but you accumulate a lot of experience over the years. But the word serial entrepreneur is one that a lot of people like to throw around. I remember a point in time where it was almost like a badge of honor to say that. And people, when you looked at their profiles or what they had done, it was maybe they had one or two companies, but you truly have a serial kind of background in terms of multiple different organizations that you've worked in, you've grown. You have a new book out called Scale Speed, How to Triple the Size of Your Business and Build a Superstar Team, Scale at Speed, I should say. So I want to dig into that because I think there's a lot of information in there that our audience and community of consultants here could really find beneficial. But before we do that, before we kind of get into all the strategies and tactics and how people can grow their businesses, let's go back in time a little bit to 1994. You started one of the first specialist digital creative companies. So first, just tell us, what does that mean, being a specialist digital creative company? What were you actually doing at that time?
It's a fancy way of saying I started one of the first web design companies. I think it was one of the first 6. I used to think it was one of the first 5, and then somebody corrected me. So it may be somewhere in the first 20, who knows? But it was the same year the web had its very first commercial website. So I was there completely by accident on day one, and it was fun.
What did you learn from that time or that experience that you still kind of keep with you to this day, or that maybe you've pulled through the different organizations and companies that you've built to this point?
Core values are everything. The one thing that I learned in my first company, so my first agency was called Hyper Interactive, and we became famous for being the first creative digital agency. And there were others who were much bigger and much better than us that were technical or marketing focused. And some of those became globally known giants. And mine was kind of cute and exquisitely creative. And I had amazing partners and amazing people working within the business doing amazing stuff. And I got to be the guy who waved his arms around a lot and spoke at conferences and things. But the thing that I learned was in the breakup of my partnership with my business partner, in which led to me exiting the business and then starting my next business, which was even more creative and even more successful. Ultimately, it all comes down to your personal values. Whether you are going to succeed or fail is about who you surround yourself with. And the people that you surround yourself with need to have values that are congruent with your own. And what I mean by that is it's going to be extremely difficult for you to trust somebody if one of your values is constant learning and it's not one of theirs, because you're going to find yourself asking them to do stuff that requires constant learning, and they're going to be incapable of doing it because it's not one of their things, right? Or integrity or honor or diligence or an eye for detail. I don't have any eye for detail at all, but all of my colleagues all over the world and through several different companies have all shared that honor thing, because it just happens to be the thing that's my central value, if you like. And core values are not the crap that you see on people's websites. I want to emphasize, this is not the customer comes first, right? This is what's deep, buried deep in you that you're not going to change. And if you surround yourself with people who share your core values, then you know that they're going to behave in predictable ways under tough situations. And growing business is all about dealing with tough situations and being able to rely on other people. Because if you can't rely on everybody else, then it comes down to you, then you're the bottleneck. And it's I've been there, stressful.
So all of our listeners and everyone tuning in right now will know that I'm in strong agreement with you. We did an episode on the importance of values in business and developing those values, something that we as a company have gone through over the last little while, where we've really embraced this. If you go to consultingsuccess.com and our stories section, we have our values there. We spent a lot of time developing those with all our team members. But to some listening, this idea of values, they've heard it before. It still kind of sounds a little bit squishy. It still sounds like it may not be relevant to an independent solo consultant or even a very small team. In your experience, Felix, at what stage should somebody be thinking about values? Is it relevant even if you're just a one person, organization, or is it only when you get to a level where you have team members?
No, you know what your values are. Although to be fair, no, that's not quite true. Most people don't have the impetus or an excuse to dig in and find out what their own values are and really think about it. But when you do, what happens is that you realize that your values have colored everything in your life, and they've colored your behaviors in terms of what you've chosen to do and who you've chosen to be with and who you've chosen not to be around. And sometimes they're exclusionary values. I mentioned the word honor. It's really difficult to pin down what that means. And it's almost impossible to prove whether somebody always behaves honorably, but boy, you know exactly when they behave dishonorably, right? So it can become a red line. And that's really quite important, because when you've identified your values, it allows you to think, so of the people that I've always worked really well with, what do I think their values are or were? And the people that I've really had conflict with, I wonder what their values are. And then you start building a picture of and coming to a realization that actually you work best with people who share your values and you work worst with people who don't share your values. And wouldn't it be nicer if your clients shared your values?
Yeah.
And that you weren't in conflict?
That's exactly it. I mean, that point right there is one thing that we've really found as we've become more intentional in telling our story, sharing our values, where in the past we didn't. And you tend to see that you work that into your messaging and you tell that story, you will repel the people who don't resonate with your values. But that's fine, because you typically would not want to engage with many of us. Like, it's not going to be a fruitful engagement. Whereas those that share those values, now they are attracted to you because those are shared values. So we've seen, even just from a marketing perspective, a real benefit from doing this.
Oh, completely. And I do quite a lot of personal consulting work with agencies and consultancies and law firms, service type businesses around proposition development. It's not my day job. It's just a thing that I have a passion for. And when I'm doing proposition workshops, which tend to last for 2 days, the place that you start is with the core values of the team in the room. And that has several functions. One is it allows people to articulate what their values are in front of their colleagues. And that creates, because by and large, the superstars who are the people that you're going to invite into the room are people that you probably share values with. So it kind of exposes the fact that you're all share values, which is great. That's an amazing cementer of, oh, wow, I'm in the right place. I've got colleagues whose values I share, right? This is great. And also, values are true and they're more or less immutable. It takes trauma to change your values, and probably trauma when you're 7 or 11 to create them in the first place, right? So whatever work comes after that is founded in a common truth within the team that is creating the proposition for your company. So the great propositions that I've worked on over the years with some of the best agencies in Europe, and starting also to be in the US and Canada, are they come from that true place of, well, do you know what? The place we started isn't going to move, and that our values are better, And I love, sometimes you get real personality coming through in a proposition because of that faith that people have in each other.
Right. Let's shift now to talk a little bit about revenue growth and sales, because you've played a big role. You've done a lot of that at multiple organizations. When you kind of transplant yourself, or when you enter a new company, whether it's one that you've started or one that you've been brought into or you've joined, what are the levers that you tend to look for that you can pull to increase sales? Like, where does your mind typically go? Where does your eye go in terms of priority first things that you would kind of look at as an opportunity to increase sales and revenue?
Well, actually, hate to say it, proposition. I know we were trying to change the subject, but if you haven't got a clear proposition, a polarizing proposition, then you've got nothing to work with. And what I mean by polarizing,
that's a value, also not like as a value proposition. We refer to this as a message. Some consider it a unique selling proposition, many different names, but it's a statement.
I'll give you a couple of examples. A really, really simple example. Alpha Century, the creative agency for entrepreneurs. Okay. Which, guess what? Attracts entrepreneurs. Another, Impero, we make tired brands famous again. If you're not a tired brand, you ain't going to phone them. But if you are, boy, they're on the list, right?
Right.
Clever campaigns created up north. Yeah. Talks about sort of the northern attitude and so on. And I don't know, sophisticated CRO for big commerce. It talks to the audience and it says, if you're not sophisticated, if you're not big commerce, if you don't want CRO, don't come to us. But if you are in that sweet spot.
What one quality that stands out among each one of the examples you just shared is focus and specialization, right? You're being very specific and intentional, calling out who the ideal client is, which for some people, and I would say most people at one point or another, is terrifying.
Oh, for all of us, it is.
Right? Yeah, because you're saying no to a lot of potential, kind of air quote, potential market. How do you counsel, how do you guide the agencies that you work with to overcome that fear and to embrace with confidence and have the, kind of the level of bravery to move forward with that with a new statement that does focus, specialize on a very specific, smaller group of the marketplace?
There are several different aspects to the answer to that. One is, if you're an agency or a consultancy, more or less, you can only handle 12 clients. It's as and if you're AKQA, which started 2 weeks before I started my first agency, AKQA started, they were much more successful than mine financially. But they've only got 12 clients. They just happen to be global, and one of them's Microsoft, right? And the other's Nike and so on. You can only really manage 12 clients. Well, that means that you can leave on the table the tens of thousands of other clients who you're not going to work with. Now, most people don't want to say, oh, I only do this, because they're hoping that Coca-Cola is going to phone them up and say, hey, do you want to be on our roster, right? Or that you're going to win Chase Manhattan as a legal account if you're a law firm or whatever. The reality is, Chase isn't going to phone you. Coke is not going to phone you because they've got their stuff sorted, right? So you might as well specialize. And if you specialize in the stuff that you find joyful, right? Jim Collins in, I think, Good to Great, but Jim Collins basically described the hedgehog principle, which is concept, which is you have to do stuff that you are good at, because if you're no good, then right, you're not going to keep your clients. That you have passion for, because that drives you and attracts people, and that is profitable, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to have all three of those things. You have to be good at it and passionate about it, and it has to be profitable in order to drive you your success. And if you're not passionate about it, then why bother doing it? Because life's too short. And I had 6 agencies of my own, 3 of which were wildly successful and very famous, and 3 of which were, well, one of them, the industry it was in didn't take off, interactive TV. The other 2 were abject failures, right? And so I've made every mistake that you can make. So I had 6 companies of my own, and I ran a group of companies, virtual merger of 12 companies. And in the last 6 or 7 years, I've helped, 30 or 40 companies scale myself, and I've got a bunch of colleagues doing the same thing. And my own business is scaling worldwide 2x, 3x. And the first thing that we do is just say, listen, what do you really want to do? What's the thing that makes your eyes light up, or your brain crackle, or your heart warm when you think about that kind of work? Then do that, because life's too short to do crap for people who just want to hand you money.
Yeah, no, this is such a powerful message, and one that we share all the time with our clients. I'm a very big believer that we did the study that we did most recently, Felix, was essentially the same thing. Most consulting firms can manage between 8 to 20 clients maximum. It's not much. It's not hundreds, right? Yeah. And so really narrowing in, so powerful. So you mentioned that's the first thing you look at in a company. You look at what is their value proposition? What is that? Are they clear on that? What would be the next? What would be kind of the second thing you would look at to see, can I pull that lever and make a difference for growth?
So again, you're going to hate me because this is going to go back to core values.
Okay. I have a feeling our conversation is going to be about two big themes today.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, everything comes down to your values and what you do. So who you are and what you do. The thing that, because we work with all kinds of organizations, all kinds of business, and social impact business, law firms, accounting, you name it, creative agencies of all kinds, and consulting firms and stuff. And when we go in, and one of the first conversations that we always have is, so how many C players have you got? And what we mean by a C player is the disengaged, the person who moans all the time and won't do the work and doesn't turn up and always has an excuse and bad mouths people behind their back and stuff. And it's a fun question to ask, how many C players have you got? And usually we work with businesses that have got between, 15 and 150 people.
Mm-hmm.
And you watch the owners or the leadership team looking at each other and they go, well, we've got Mark and Sally and Joe, Azim, and you think, okay, good. Well, you all know who they are, right? You're all looking at each other, agreeing. Why are they still with you?
Mm.
And somebody will inevitably say, well, we can't get rid of Joe because they organize the drinks on a Friday, so they're responsible for our culture. And it's like, oh, okay, quick wins, right? So it's an immediate call. And the funny thing is, and the reason it comes down to values is because they're not bad people.
Mm.
They are not actually bad at their jobs. They just don't share your values. And invariably, two things happen when you move people on. You move people on to companies where they share their values and suddenly they become superstars. And you look at each other and you say, hold on, wait a sec, but they were awful with us.
Mm-hmm.
It's because they didn't fit your values. Their values are different and they now fit the new place. The second thing that happens, invariably, is you get a stream of people saying, I don't know why you didn't do that years ago.
Mm.
And we prevaricate and procrastinate sometimes for years before getting rid of people we know are holding us back. So those two things, you get a great proposition and the right people on the bus. Again, Jim Collins. And that's what gives you the power.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early-stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early-stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
Now, I want to push you to go a little bit more tactical because I know our community is saying, okay, these are great. These are very powerful. But if I'm looking over the shoulder of Felix as he's running one of his companies and he's tasked with revenue growth, he's tasked with scaling the business, what are you doing on the day-to-day? Let's just assume that you now have the right people. You have mainly A and maybe a few players. You have a clear focus on who your ideal client is, and you have a proposition and a statement that you can put in front that will differentiate you. What are you doing on a typical daily, weekly, monthly basis to grow revenue? Where do you focus? What does that look from a more tactical perspective?
I'm a great believer in not trying to push yourselves onto a client base. What I mean by that is, let me do a little anecdote, okay? Forgive me. In 2008, I was, 14 years into my agency CEO career. I was probably on agency number 4 or something, 5. And at the time, we had invented ECRM by stealing Mei Lin Feng's CRM principles out of Oracle. And a side story to that, I met her at a conference a few years later and she said, oh, what do you do? And I said, oh, I invented ECRM. She said, oh, that's amazing. I invented CRM. And I felt about this big. So we had this great proposition. We were the market leaders. And 2008, the phone stopped going for the first time in 14 years. And for 14 years, literally, we'd thought, oh, we want to grow a bit. And the phone would go and it would be, I don't know, General Motors giving us their business. And that happened from 94 to 2008.
And why did that, before you go on with the story, Felix, why did that happen? Why were you getting the phone calls from General Motors or whoever else?
Oh, because we were great at PR, firstly. We were great at, I had blue hair and an arrogant streak, right? And we invented stuff. We went around doing amazing, groundbreaking work. Not me, but my colleagues doing amazing stuff that attracted a lot of attention. So we were always high enough profile, and we always had a specific, highly specific offering, right?
Can you give an example of something you did other than having blue hair that helped you to get press and publicity? Just as an example for everybody wondering, I think I'm doing great work too, but my phone's not ringing. Give us an example of what you were doing.
So, right at the beginning, it was easy. I was just writing about the web in Campaign magazine and the advertising press because they didn't know what on earth was going on. And probably for the first 10 years, it was about being controversial and irritating people. So I'd say something controversial like banners suck and anybody who's doing banners should die. And I'd write an article about that using nice long words and intelligent argument or relatively intelligent argument.
Right, yeah.
And that would get enough attention. So again, polarizing worked then. But then, I'd stand up and I'd talk sense. And while everybody else was using technical jargon, I used plain English. Because I don't think anything that I ever did needs to be technical. It doesn't need to exclude people. I want to include people and bring people into the fold and teach people. And what's really interesting is that teaching people became the solution in 2008 when the phone stopped going. Because I hired a new business development agency, right? Telesales, hitting the phones. I hired an agency that did speed dating for client agency type things. And I went along to a bunch of those. And I hired an in-house head of business development. And when that didn't work, I hired a guy to go through LinkedIn and try and call people up off LinkedIn. And none of it worked, right? Absolutely none of it. And my usual old shtick of standing up on conference stages and being slightly controversial stopped working. And it all stopped working basically because everybody was terrified because they didn't know what was going on with 2008. And then somebody handed me a book called The Challenger Sale, or it probably wasn't The Challenger Sale then, it was Spin Selling by Neil Rackham. And one of the things, like most business books, except obviously my own, right? But most business books are 90% hot air because you have a great idea and then the publisher says, yeah, but it needs to be 60,000 words. Just something has occurred to me. I was told by a very published friend of mine that if you're writing a book, it has to be 50,000 words or more because otherwise they won't print your name on the spine.
Right.
Anyway, so this book, Neil Rackham's book, Spin Selling, is a very big book and it's quite thick, but it can be summarized on a single sheet of paper, which is quite cool. But one of the interesting things it says in the course of this book is teach people and people will think you're an expert.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know what? I've been doing that, although I've been doing it in a slightly controversial, polarizing kind of way. Since the beginning of my career, I've been telling people what the web was going to be capable of doing. And I've been talking to people about user-generated content and inventing stuff and telling people how it worked. So I decided to teach. And so I put on an event, which was, we're going to teach you how to do ECRM strategy, best practice in ECRM strategy. If you're interested in this, come to this event.
And how did you promote that? Were you sending emails? Were you calling people, sending letters in the mail? How are you actually getting that message in front of people?
So we repurposed our Nathan, who was the guy who was hired to call people from LinkedIn, to find people with CRM in their job titles and invite them to this event. Then we hired the top floor of a private members club in Soho in central London called the Groucho Club, which is a famous boozy place. But during the day, it's completely empty and unused. And I figured that because it was quite famous and quite fun, people would want to come there as much for the venue and to see a famous members club as much as to come to see me flapping my mouth talking about ECRM. And it worked. And over 4 years, I think I gave the same talk 37 times. And every other event that we put on, we won a client.
Did you charge for that event or was it free?
It was free at the time.
Okay. And do you remember how many people you got the first time you ran it? How many people actually attended?
Oh, God. The first time I ran it, Nathan, forgot to follow anybody up that he'd invited. And at 8:00 in the morning on that day, he said, Felix, I've got a confession. I forgot to follow anybody up. So there's only one guy coming. And I said, okay, well, we'll cancel. He said, no, he's coming from Manchester, which is a few hundred miles away from London. Significant distance in UK terms. And obviously it's insignificant from anybody else's point of view. But it meant that he'd got a hotel and that he was coming. So we put this event on for one person. The following day, he gave us £250,000 worth of business.
How did you feel? I mean, at that moment when you had obviously been, I would assume, mentally preparing for this big day to see a bunch of people in the room. Now there's going to be one person. You wanted to cancel, which I think would be probably the state of mind of most people in that situation. Yeah. You pushed through. Like, how did you do that? And I mean, what were the lessons maybe you learned from that, if there were any that you could extract?
Oh, a million lessons. I actually packed the room with people from the agency and their various partners, our various partners, and a couple of ringers and so on. And somebody from next door. And so it looked like it was full. And about 6 months ago, I told this story on LinkedIn. And Max, who was the guy who showed up, wrote to me. He said, you know what? I never knew that. He was a client of ours for years. And now he runs his own agency. Really lovely man. Anyway, the lessons, listen, the show must go on. And if one person turns up, they may become your biggest client. This guy gave us, I don't know what £250,000 is in Canadian dollars, but it's...
Oh, even in US dollars, yeah, it's a very solid 6 figures. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. It's a 300 US grand, right? Decent amount of business and, a long relationship. And so the lessons from that, the show must go on. And you never know how important one person is going to be. Yeah. And even now, we run webinars where we teach scale at speed methodologies and frameworks. We teach the 2Y3X programs, methodologies and frameworks to anybody who wants to come. And if there are 10 people there or 70 people there, it gets exactly the same amount of attention because we don't need millions of clients. Yeah, we need the right clients. If we put on the right training event, the right clients will come.
When you look back, whether it was that first one or even your more recent webinars or workshops or talks that you give, at the end of that, you are making some kind of a call to action, an invitation for people to take a next step or to contact you, correct?
No.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Because this is what I was going to ask, because I know there's a very big difference between how, whether it's British or certain European countries, think about the offers that they make and how intentional and direct they are. Whereas, especially in comparison to, let's say, the market in the US, where it can be much more direct. Some people might say a little bit more aggressive, but also create fantastic results.
Totally. Different cultures.
No, yeah. So talk to me about that. How do you find, because you now have gone from really focusing on the European market to going more global. What are your thoughts and what have you found? I'd love to get at here, Felix, is what have you found to work best? If there was no call to action, let's just say you have a chance, you have an audience full of great people in the room that you want to become clients. What will you say as you transition through that content when you get near the end or in the middle? What do you find works best to go from teaching to actually turning that into a client conversation?
So when I was 18 or 19, I sold advertising space on the phone for commission only. And I did it for like 18 months or something. I was really good at it. But you become a sales machine. And I hate to say it, you become a sales arsehole. And it put me off selling for life. And US people don't like me saying that, right? Because selling is a very highly regarded profession because it's extremely well done there. And it's part of the culture. In my culture in the UK, it's kind of, we shy away from it. What I learned about selling was it's not about how you manipulate people or push people or persuade people. It's about how you lay the stuff that you've got out in a way that people can easily figure out whether they want it or not. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, proposition comes into that. I mean, my company's called 2Y3X. It does what it says on the tin, 2 years, 3 times growth, right? That's what we do. People can figure out whether or not it's for them. I don't need to sell it. I do need to have it out there, but I don't need to sell it. Now, what we used to call a customer journey and is now called a sales funnel, especially if you go to Clubhouse, right? But a customer journey essentially says you pick people up who are vaguely interested or might be interested or generally interested, and you make it more and more specific as you go along. So if you do I write an article in entrepreneur.com about what the general principles of scaling up. Somebody read that and they may remember my name, or they may remember 2Y3X's name. They may remember the name of the book, Scale at Speed. If I then put on an event that says how to use 2Y3X's frameworks to implement Scale at Speed, then those people who are interested are going to come to that event. If the next point of contact is that they get a self-assessment tool, which is one of the things that we do, and they can do it, there's no contact, right? We're not pushing them through anything. If they want to do it, they do it. Now, the more that you get your audience to do stuff of their own volition, to elect to follow you and follow the journey, and to go narrower and narrower and narrower, at a certain point, they're going to have to, because there's nowhere else to go, they're going to have to start talking to you. So how can you make this better for us? Because we teach a lot, right? It's all out there. The book is the full manual for 2Y3X. What it doesn't do is do it for you. It doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't hold your feet to the flames, and you're not guided through the program. So if you've read the book and you've done the self-assessment, and we've told you, the self-assessment thing has told you what your biggest areas that you need to address are and your biggest opportunities are and so on, you can try the process for yourself. At a certain point, a certain type of customer or prospect is going to say, do you know what? I would pay to have this done for me. Mm-hmm. Now, for us, we're the most expensive in the market. In the Middle East and Europe and the UK and Canada, we are the most expensive in the market. Not quite in the US, but so we're a premium service. But again, coming back to proposition, it's a 2Y3X. It's 2 years, 3 times revenue. If you want that delivered for you, then you're going to have to talk to us at some point.
Yeah. No, I find it very interesting, Felix, because what we often share with our clients is the idea that the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to sales is they think that sales is something they need to do to somebody. And so that's when they start making like manipulation, persuasion, all that kind of stuff.
Do you remember all of that? So that get them to say yes 4 times, they'll say yes a 5th time.
Right. All the tricks, right? all that kind of stuff. And we're much bigger believers in this idea of that sales is something that you do with someone. It's collaborative process. It's about supporting them. One of my first companies with my cousin Sam that we started many, many years ago was called Kankei Culture. And Kankei is the Japanese word for relationship. So we really believe that relationship and culture, as we are building in the Japanese market and so forth. So I'm very aligned with what you're saying. And certainly I think it is important that people look at what's going to work best in their culture. What works, for example, in the US, right, may not work somewhere else. And likewise, completely. An approach in UK may not work as well in a different market. So
I'll give you a couple of examples then. So we opened up 2Y3X in the Middle East about beginning of the year. And the Middle East is really interesting because one of our consultants in the Middle East, and our consultants tend to work with 3 or 4 clients, which means 3 or 4 days a month working with clients. They usually have either a portfolio career or they've got a day job. One of our consultants is the head of customer experience for Amex in the whole of the Middle East, right? He's based in Saudi. And he tells the story of there's a manual that says when somebody decides they want to cancel their Amex card, the manual that's produced by Americans basically says, phone them up straight away and you will turn them around. Now, in the Middle East, life doesn't work like that, right? And so he spent 2 years persuading them and then running tests to show them that actually decisions like that are made on emotion, not on logic. In America, those kinds of decisions are logical decisions. Oh, I can't quite afford it. Oh, it's not giving me the benefits that I thought it would. In the Middle East, they've pissed me off, or the transaction got declined and I'm really annoyed with them, so I'm going to cancel. And so in the Middle East, if you let them cool off for a week and then phone them up, they'll almost universally sign straight back up, right? So the culture there, as compared to the US, is very, very different. Our head of the US business is based in California, which to me is the gentle end of the US, right? He works with a client in Calgary. The client in Calgary thinks that he's a very American and quite not aggressive, because he's not, because he's an amazing human being, but very forthright compared to what they're used to. Now, actually, it works in their favor, because part of what we do is holding people's feet to the flames so that they can achieve greatness.
Yeah.
But it's, even the cultural divide across 1,000 miles.
Yeah. We see this all the time, and we have clients as well all around the world. And that's one of the things that we love. It's one of our values, is just this idea of, being worldwide. We actually, one of our values is we are worldwide. And we see this play out just over and over, day after day. And I just find it so fascinating as you start to understand how different things work in different cultures and different geographic regions, and then leverage that, use that in how you conduct business and more importantly, in your relationships. I want to ask you about your role and how your role has changed, Felix, because now, whether it's with 2i3x or your other companies that you've been, agencies that you've been part of, moving into that CEO role, from going from initial kind of concept and idea creator to building a team to then being the CEO. How does your role change? I mean, even take today as an example. What are you spending most of your time doing? Are you creating content? Are you talking with prospective buyers? Or what does your day-to-day look like?
It's interesting. When I started out, I remember getting my very first business card and printing CEO on it. There were like 3 people in my company, right? And it took me 15 years before I wasn't in the weeds and I was working strategically rather than constantly tactically and on the back foot. And so it was probably 15 years before I became a real CEO, despite having had that, long career. And then I became a group CEO, and that was a role which was corralling and leading and engaging a bunch of founders and CEOs themselves. They all ran their own businesses, successful businesses. My job was to motivate them to grow the group. Now my job is very strategic, extremely strategic. I mean, I still work with clients at the beginning of the journey. So I still do, on the side, I do proposition work, but I still do strategy map days and workshops with a few clients. But by and large, it's M&A. So we build groups, because most of the companies that come into the program want to sell at some point. So we provide an option for some of them to do that. Building the infrastructure behind and the operational infrastructure behind 2i3x. Because 2i3x, we only decided to scale it in March last year. Before that, we were just in the UK. And then COVID hit.
And why did you decide to scale it? And before we kind of jump back to your role, why not just keep it in the UK?
Well, I'd spent 6 years being I retired when I was 47. So 6 or 7 years ago. And I then I ran the program for people, bespoke, as a solo consultant. I earned more money doing that for less time spent than I'd ever seen in my life. I was working 7 days a month or 8 days a month, and it was great. And I started writing the book because somebody asked me to suggested I write it after an interview. And people kept saying, can we do this in this market or that market or for this kind of company? And I kind of resisted. And then I decided a couple of years ago that I'd bring on a business partner so that we'd have redundancy. So that if one of us was sick, then we could still carry it on, right? And then COVID hit. And what happened with COVID was Frank and I, who's now retired actually, but Frank and I looked at the business that we had and the clients that we had, and we just said, you know what, this is ridiculous. We're going pro bono. We went pro bono. We announced that anybody who needed help, because all of the businesses in the UK and Western Europe where we were starting to work, were in deep, deep, deep trouble. We've had successes and failures. We know how to deal with a crisis. So we just said, anybody who needs help, come to us and we'll advise for free. No strings, absolutely no strings. And what happened was that I then had a flood of people who I've known of my entire career in the UK, in France, Brussels, North America, all over the place, Germany, got in touch and said, this is amazing. We're kind of stuck too. Can we help? We've got capacity. We're not doing anything else. And so we built up this network of amazing, generous people who've all been CEOs and founders themselves. And then they wanted to be trained in 2i3x and the program and how it works. And that became an international network with licensees. And now we're all, we've got people in Africa and, Italy and Spain and all over the Middle East. I mean, it's amazing.
Right. Yeah.
There was a question before that, though, wasn't there?
It was. And I want to be respectful of the time that we have scheduled today. Okay. But I'll transition the question a little bit. You were talking about your role now as CEO. I'd like to know if you think about kind of like isolate in your day-to-day, though maybe one or two habits that you're doing consistently that you feel contribute the most to your performance, your mental clarity, the success that you have, the progress that you make. What are one or two things that you do, whether it's a smoothie in the morning or exercise, some kind of what are one or two things that really for you are, they definitely have to happen consistently every day?
I don't actually have anything like that at all. I'm very chaotic. I'm very strategic. I'm not a doer. I'm not a detail person. So I have people around me who are and who do that for me and who create order out of the chaos that I slightly am. But because I love the strategy stuff, for me, the things that are incredibly important to me and that I do regularly is I make sure that the people around with and that we're working with, even at the extremities of the organization and clients, are people we share values with. I fired a client a couple of months ago for lying to me. And that lost us, $300,000 worth of revenue. And that's life, but life's too short to work with people who don't share your values. So that's one thing. The second thing is I find myself triaging my workload. I'm most effective when I've got one thing to do. I'm least effective when I've got 20 things to do. So I'm vicious about working out what I have to do and figuring out whether it's necessary or not. Yeah. So there's the Eisenhower diagram, and I'm sure you're familiar with, and everybody listening, the urgent and important, not urgent, not important, that grid. It's an amazing thing. And if you do that very regularly and just make sure you're not doing stuff that isn't strictly necessary. I'm the CEO. I'm responsible for the strategy. I'm responsible for M&A. I'm responsible for making sure that the program really works every single time. I'm responsible for the culture and the people. I don't need to be organizing meetings. I don't need to be organizing marketing or PR or any of the things that I love doing and I can do, but other people can do, actually, if I'm honest with myself, much better than I can.
Right.
And who will do it in a diligent, orderly way and allow me to, on Friday, I spent 4 hours in my office with the laptop shut, with the door shut, thinking through how we're going to deal with a situation that we've got with our consultant training and onboarding unit in Lebanon, where the electricity is out and has been for weeks. And that kind of headspace and ability to focus comes from not being in the weeds.
Yeah.
And the art of being a CEO is being on the business, not in it, right?
Certainly. 2 questions before wrapping up. The first is, over the last 6 months, what's one book that you've either read or listened to that you would recommend? And it could be fiction or nonfiction.
Right. It's the one that's created the most impact. It's called Scarcity, Why Having So Little Means So Much. And it's by Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir. It's a book about the bandwidth tax that is imposed by not having enough of food or water or headspace or, we in the West are incredibly privileged. And it was reading that book just made me rethink how we approach the pro bono work that we do, because a lot of our business is pro bono still, and how we approach markets like Mo, one of my senior colleagues, is in Zambia. How do we approach Zambia as a market when actually it's got pressures that we would find inconceivably harsh?
Yeah. Well, that one's definitely going on my Amazon list. So thank you. It sounds very, very interesting. Last question before wrapping up. For those that want to learn more, and I highly encourage people to learn more about your new book, Scale at Speed, and also your company and just your musings, where would you direct people to, Felix? Where should they go to learn more about you and your work?
The simplest place is if you go to scaleatspeed.com. On the homepage, it's got links to 2y3x.com. It's got links to the scorecard, which is a self-assessment tool where you can figure out where you sit in your scalability, I guess. It's got recordings and videos and all sorts of stuff. So scaleatspeed.com is probably a good place to start.
Wonderful. We're going to have all that linked up in the show notes. Felix, thank you again so much for coming on today.
My pleasure, Michael. It's been fun.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.